I still remember the day I first set foot on my new farm. The air smelled fresh, the land seemed endless, and the only sounds were the birds singing and the wind rustling through the fields. It was exactly what I'd always dreamed of, a quiet piece of countryside all to myself. I'd spent years saving up for this place, a modest farmhouse with a couple of barns, a stretch of pasture perfect for a small herd of goats or maybe a few horses, and a raggedy dirt driveway that connected it all to the main road. Sure, the property needed some love. There were fences to fix, weeds taller than me, and a house that cried out for renovation. But that was half the fun. As I stood at the wooden gate, I closed my eyes and soaked in the peace. No neighbors, no traffic, no drama, just me, my land, and the promise of a simpler life. Little did I know, the so-called simpler life wasn't going to stay simple for long, because right across the field, beyond a thick row of trees, sat the Primrose Meadows subdivision, complete with its very own HOA. And heading up that HOA was a woman I can only describe as the quintessential Karen. You know the type. Permanent scowl hidden behind a too-wide smile, hair styled in that signature, "May I speak to the manager?" cut, and an attitude that screamed, "I am always right." My troubles started the second week after I moved in. I was outside, wrestling with a busted water pump behind the barn, when I heard a voice call out, "Hello? Excuse me! Hello!" I popped my head around the barn, and there she was, wearing bright pink sneakers and holding a clipboard. "Hi," I said, walking over. "Can I help you?" She stuck out her hand with an overly sweet smile. "I'm Karen, president of the Primrose Meadows HOA. I just wanted to pop by and officially welcome you to the neighborhood." I looked around, half expecting to see another house hidden in the fields. "Oh, thanks," I replied. "But, I'm not in your neighborhood. My property line is way over there." I waved toward a row of pine trees marking the boundary. Her smile didn't waver. "Well, you're close to our neighborhood," she insisted. "We like to keep an eye on all the properties in the area to make sure everything stays nice and tidy. You know, so it doesn't bring down our home values." I remember thinking that was a weird comment, but I shrugged it off. "Yeah, well, I'm just doing my own thing here. Don't worry, I plan to keep my farm in great shape." Karen gave me one of those tight-lipped smiles and glanced around like she was already mentally redecorating the place. "Lovely. Let me know if you need any HOA guidelines. Sometimes folks find it easier to follow the Primrose Meadows standards, even if you're not technically a member." I forced a smile and thanked her, then waved goodbye. It felt strange, but I chalked it up to her just being nosy. Little did I know that clipboard and that forced grin were both signs I was in for a wild ride. About a month later, I'd almost forgotten about Karen's visit. I threw myself into renovating the farmhouse, ripping out old plumbing, painting the walls, repairing the roof. Every night I fell asleep exhausted but happy, surrounded by the sweet smell of new lumber and fresh paint. One afternoon, though, I noticed something off. My driveway gate, which was really just an old wooden fence gate on a rusty hinge, had been left open. I always kept it closed, especially since I had some goats I didn't want wandering off. But there it was, wide open. At first I thought maybe the wind had caught it, or I'd forgotten to latch it in my rush. But then I spotted footprints in the mud near the gate, sneaker prints that didn't match my own boots. I followed them a short way up my drive, but they disappeared into the grass. Still, it left me uneasy. A few days later, I caught a glimpse of someone standing at the edge of my property by the tree line. When they saw me notice them, they hurried off. I ran over to check and found a small sign in the ground that read, "Future Development Site, Primrose Meadows Expansion." My jaw dropped. They had literally pounded a sign on my land suggesting some future building project. I yanked the sign out of the ground so hard I nearly fell over. Enough was enough. I decided I needed a better security setup. I installed a basic camera at the front gate pointing down the driveway. If anyone tried to come in without my permission, I'd know about it. Problem solved, right? A week later, the camera caught Karen in action. She strolled right up to my gate and started taking pictures of my house, my barn, everything she could zoom in on. She had a measuring tape in one hand, her phone in the other, and that same clipboard under her arm. I watched the footage in disbelief. She was acting like my place was part of some HOA improvement project. The nerve. I confronted her the next day when she was back out at my fence line, presumably measuring my property boundaries. "Hey!" I called from my porch, walking briskly toward her. "What exactly are you doing?" She gave me a smug smile. "Just updating our community records. We have certain architectural guidelines in Primrose Meadows, and we want to make sure everything around us stays consistent." I felt anger rising in my chest. "I've told you before, I'm not part of the HOA. This is private property." She nodded slowly, as if I were a child. "Yes, but Primrose Meadows is exploring potential expansions. It'd really be in everyone's best interest if you joined. You'll get full access to our amenities, like the community pool, the tennis courts, and in return, you'd keep your property in line with our standards." That's when I realized she truly believed she could force me to join their HOA. It wasn't just a friendly suggestion. My farmland was next on her to-do list, and she wasn't going to let it go. I raised my hand, palm out. "No thanks, Karen. I'm not interested in your pool or your tennis courts. I moved out here for peace and quiet. Please get off my property." Her nostrils flared slightly. "Fine," she said, turning on her heel. "But don't say I didn't warn you. We like to keep our neighborhood looking nice." Over the next couple of weeks, weird things started happening. I'd wake up to find new little signs staked around my fields. HOA access point or reserved for future park space. One day, I even found a bright orange violation notice taped to my barn door that read, "Your structure's color does not meet Primrose Meadows guidelines." It was ridiculous. My barn didn't meet their guidelines. I wasn't even in their neighborhood. Yet Karen was acting like she had full jurisdiction over my place. I tore down every sign, every notice, and started taking pictures of them as evidence. Then came the moment I realized just how far Karen was willing to go. One afternoon, I found a group of strangers wandering around in my pasture with their dogs. When I asked them what they were doing, they said Karen had told them my farm would become a leash-free dog park. I nearly lost it. She was flat out lying to these people, telling them my property was open for public use. The trespassers apologized when they realized the truth and left. But I was furious. It was time to get serious. I called the local police to file a complaint against Karen for trespassing and harassment. Unfortunately, the officer who showed up said there wasn't much they could do unless I had concrete proof that Karen was behind these trespassers and signs. "Just keep documenting everything," the officer suggested, "and maybe talk to a lawyer." I decided to post about the situation in a local community Facebook group, hoping to find a lawyer recommendation. People were stunned by what Karen was doing and started sharing their own horror stories about Primrose Meadows HOA. Turns out, Karen was notorious for her controlling tactics. Quick break in the story. If you're listening right now, I'd love to know where you're from. Have you ever dealt with an HOA or a Karen like this? Comment below with your city so I can see how far this kind of drama spreads. Now, back to the action, because things were about to get even crazier. I contacted a small law firm that specialized in property disputes, and they immediately took an interest in my case. The lawyer I spoke with, Erica, was outraged at the idea of an HOA trying to annex farmland without the owner's consent. One of Erica's first steps was to run a title search to confirm exactly where my property lines lay. She also wanted to see if there had ever been any arrangement with Primrose Meadows, some old easement or usage agreement. But no, it was crystal clear. My land was 100% independent, with no legal ties to the subdivision. That, however, didn't stop Karen. 2 days later, I received a letter in the mail on official HOA letterhead, Notice of Proposed Annexation. Dear resident, we would like to inform you that your property has been selected for annexation into the Primrose Meadows community. This annexation will benefit both you and the existing neighborhood by providing blah, blah, blah. I read the letter 5 times, each pass making my blood boil more. Selected for annexation? They made it sound like I'd won some sweepstakes. The letter threatened that if I refused the annexation, the HOA would take legal action to enforce their covenants, which would allegedly apply to me because I lived in the adjacent area. I marched over to Erica's office, nearly splitting the door in half with my frustration. She scanned the letter and let out a low whistle. "This is complete nonsense," she said. "The HOA can't annex anything without city approval and the landowner's signature. They're bluffing." "Then how do I stop them from harassing me?" I asked. She explained the process. We could send a cease and desist letter, gather more evidence, and, if needed, file for an injunction to keep them off my property. It felt like overkill for a crazy neighbor, but at this point, I was ready to protect my farm by any means necessary. One night, as I was scrolling through that community Facebook group, I stumbled on a post from someone claiming they'd been invited to a special HOA meeting about future development. Intrigued, I asked for more details, and they sent me an email screenshot from the HOA. "Dear Primrose Meadows resident, please join us for a confidential discussion about the proposed expansion, which will add valuable resources, nature trails, and green space to our community. We will also address potential new rules for any annexed properties to ensure a cohesive neighborhood aesthetic." It listed a date, time, and location. Karen's own house. The big twist? This meeting was set for the following evening, and it sounded like the main topic was my farm. I was torn. Should I try to sneak in, pose as a resident, and catch them in the act? Erica, my lawyer, advised against it, saying I might end up trespassing on their property if they realized I wasn't an HOA member. Instead, we decided to gather more intel from actual residents who planned to attend. As luck would have it, one neighbor who despised Karen volunteered to record the meeting on their phone. That night, while I sat at home seething, this neighbor was in Karen's living room quietly documenting the entire discussion. The next morning, I got a text from them. "Wait till you hear this. It's insane." Sure enough, the audio recording revealed that Karen was telling the HOA members a slew of lies about my farm. She claimed my property was in terrible disrepair and hurting the subdivision's property values, which was blatantly false. She insisted I had verbally agreed to let them annex the farmland but changed my mind last minute. She pitched the idea of building a private HOA park on my fields, complete with a dog run, playground, and charming flower gardens, all funded by the HOA's budget. What got me the most was Karen telling them, "Don't worry, once we get the city on our side, they'll force him to sign the annexation. We just have to keep the pressure on." The arrogance was unbelievable. Fueled by anger, I took that recording to Erica. "Can we use this?" I asked. She smirked. "Oh, definitely. Karen's basically admitting she's trying to bully you into giving up your land. This is evidence of her malicious intent." That same day, Erica fired off a cease and desist letter to the HOA board, attaching the transcript of Karen's remarks and warning them that if they didn't end their harassment immediately, we'd pursue legal action. We also forwarded the letter to the city council, along with a formal complaint about Karen's attempts to annex land illegally. I wish the story ended there, but Karen's antics only escalated. One morning, I woke up to find my chicken coop door wide open with footprints all around. Several of my chickens were missing. I searched for hours and found 3 of them hiding near the barn, obviously traumatized. Another one I never did find. The next day, the water in my horse trough was drained. The spigot was left running, flooding half the corral. A random act of vandalism? Maybe. But I couldn't ignore the possibility that Karen was behind it, especially given her desperate attempts to make my farm look unmaintained. I installed more cameras around the barn, the chicken coop, even one hidden in the oak tree that overlooked a section of the pasture. If Karen set foot on my land again, I'd have her on camera from every angle. Sure enough, a few nights later, the barn camera caught a figure in a hoodie sneaking around. They tried to stay low, but in the faint moonlight I could make out the outline of short, choppy hair, Karen's signature style. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but I recognized the silhouette. She fiddled with my fence for a minute, maybe trying to break the lock, then scurried away when motion lights kicked on. That was it. I called the police again, showed them the footage, and said I wanted to press charges for trespassing. They took a report, but without a clear face or license plate, it was still tricky to prove 100% it was her. Meanwhile, the rest of the Primrose Meadows HOA board was growing suspicious of Karen. According to some neighbors who reached out to me privately, Karen had been using HOA funds for legal fees and property improvement research, all in connection to my farm. This caused a mini revolt. A few of the board members demanded to see the receipts and wanted to hold an emergency vote to remove Karen from her position. Karen tried to maintain control, but she was losing allies fast, especially when the city council started investigating the bogus annexation request. In a matter of weeks, Karen went from being the smug queen bee of the HOA to a pariah. Public opinion turned against her, especially after more and more neighbors came forward with stories of her bullying tactics. Some folks even admitted she'd faked resident complaints about my property to create a false sense of urgency. The city council hearing for her annexation request was scheduled for a Tuesday evening. Erica and I showed up with a thick binder of evidence. Photos of the trespassing signs, screenshots of Karen lurking around my place at odd hours, the audio recording from the secret meeting, and documented statements from neighbors. Karen arrived alone, looking a bit frayed around the edges. Gone was her confident smirk. She seemed more like a cornered animal than the unstoppable busybody I'd first met. She tried to argue that annexation was for the greater good, claiming my farm was a community hazard and bringing down property values. But when Erica confronted her with the evidence, especially the recording of her saying the city would force me to sign, the council members were appalled. They questioned her motives, asked why she hadn't disclosed that I was never part of the HOA, and grilled her about the unauthorized usage of HOA funds. Karen fumbled, making excuses that contradicted one another. She tried to pivot blame onto other board members, but they weren't having it. In the end, the council unanimously rejected her annexation proposal, condemning her for wasting their time and forging a crisis where none existed. The very next day, Karen officially resigned from her post as HOA President, citing personal reasons. Rumor has it the HOA forced her out to avoid a lawsuit. Several neighbors told me they'd seen her packing up her car and leaving town. I don't know if that's true, but I haven't seen her since. As for me, I finally got the peace and quiet I'd longed for. The new HOA president wrote me a polite letter apologizing for Karen's behavior and insisted they had no further interest in my farm. In fact, a few residents reached out to say they supported me, sharing that they wanted to keep the countryside intact rather than expand the subdivision. With Karen gone, the sabotage mysteriously stopped. No more trespassers, no more petty notices, no more freaky night visits. My chickens are thriving, my goats are happy, and the expansions I'm making to the farmhouse are going smoothly. Sometimes I stand by that old wooden gate, still a bit creaky but holding strong, and smile, remembering the battles I fought to keep my land truly mine. If there's one silver lining to all this chaos, it's that I've learned exactly how strong I can be when someone tries to take away what's mine. And I've also made a few new friends in the process, neighbors who appreciate my little slice of country heaven for what it is. Would I do it all again? Sure. This land is my dream, and no scheming HOA Karen is ever going to take that away. Here's to living free, minding my own business, and enjoying the simple life I've worked so hard to build. Remember, if you haven't already, drop a comment below and tell me what city you're from. I'm super curious to see where everyone's tuning in from, and whether you've ever faced off against a Karen of your own. Stay strong, stand your ground, and don't let anyone push you around on your own property.